All right, guys. Hey, Sam Patrick here for Splits and Whiskey. Liz Arts is unfortunately not feeling good, so we didn't drag her out here to make sure she could speak all nasally on Zoom and all that. But today we have a legend amongst legends here, John Dominguez. I will let him introduce himself in a second here, but we could probably just go over his resume for an entire hour, if not the rest of the day. Thanks for joining us. As you know, Splints and Whiskey is a podcast designed to take the lessons learned from old salty dogs like myself and John, pay it forward to the next group of medics so they can avoid the walker dip that we've had to experience through our life. Also, time for my shameless plug to the hat I'm wearing for the Honor Foundation. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for this program, especially since we have some soft veterans or soon to be soft veterans listening to the podcast or people in our network. Highly recommend that anybody who is transitioning out of special operations take advantage of the phenomenal program that the Honor Foundation provides, because just like I'm sure John can vouch for this, when you think you have transition figured out, you realize, oh no, I actually don't. And it's a phenomenal program. It's free and it creates a bomb-proof network that you can not rival anywhere. So there it is. If you're interested, honor.org. If you're interested in volunteering or donating, also visit that as well. Thank you. All right, John, welcome to the podcast. I got to work on my sweet podcast voice here. John Dominguez, a legend in military medicine, is currently serving as the AMED Honorary Sergeant Major for the Army Medical Department, has been the former president of the Special Operations Medical Association, amongst a bazillion other things. So I'll kick it over to you to introduce yourself and we'll roll on from there.
Thank you. Sam, it's great seeing you again after several years, and you know, especially you healing up pretty well. Because I think one of the last times I saw you was you were in the hospital here with a little accident. But one of the great things about that day when I went into the hospital is I had the I wouldn't say pleasure, but I had the ability to call Dr. Eastridge and tell him the situation I was in, the situation you were in, and he was able to facilitate me finding you immediately and getting to your room very quickly. And one of the things that I can tell you that I've appreciated throughout my career, and I've been just as many of us have been the beneficiaries of, is we had a lot of great mentors, and we had mentors that cared beyond what the military required them to, and they developed us, and we built strong relationships with them. And one of the biggest things that I took away from every one of those mentors that I had was that, pay it forward, pass it back to people, and then don't get disappointed if they decide not to, follow the trend, whether it be medicine or something else, but because people make their own decisions. But at the same time, it really does create a large brotherhood and a great lineage. And that is the type of thing that, in Army medicine or military medicine, it really transcends globally.
Yeah.
Because as you all know, we've all done foreign partner training, and there's a difference between meeting somebody for the first time, and then, the next time you meet them, you guys are, in a combat situation together. And then you keep running into each other either at conferences or when you go overseas. And then next thing you know, you've built a lifelong friend that started when you were an E5, right? And, then you guys, both end up rising through the ranks together. And the integration that people look for, especially in this next conflict that people are predicting, and that's been outlined in the National Strategic Strategy and National Defense Strategy of integrated deterrence. That's where integration starts, is just between people, not forced upon. And the one of the funniest things, I've got to take a quick minute to kind of put a little bit of a tone on something that I'm going to allude to later on and speak about, is that in 2006 I came home on leave from Fort Bragg to visit my parents and brother. And I got a phone call from my team sergeant, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to do some thinking on this stuff. Call some of your Navy buddies or whatnot. But all the guys in the last teams that went to the Philippines, their optics got ruined, and the command's pretty upset. So we got to figure out a way to protect them." So I was like, "Okay, I'll get on online and do some research." So I go to the other room. I have got my computer out. My father asked me, he's like, "What are you doing?" And he was a a crew chief in Vietnam, and then he
Mm.
pilot. And as a matter of fact, funny side story, he flew with Rocky Farr
Oh,
and
nice.
back in Vietnam, and then when he when Rocky became a major, and he came to San Antonio, he flew with my dad so he could keep his flight surgeon hours. But my dad asked what I was researching, and I told him, and he looked at me really funny, and he said, how far are you going to be shooting? What's the tree line? I said, oh, maybe about 50 meters. And he said, why do you need optics? And I just thought to myself, I felt so small, but he was exactly right. It was so simple. We just did not think, why do we need them? We're not going to see past the trees day or night. The only thing that we really needed was lasers. No. So I was very humbled by that. And so, you know, we have done a lot of things, and you were talking about the combating the Walker dip earlier in medicine across the board. But we have to do two things. A lot of people have gone and looked back into the past, and they've looked at injury patterns from World War II, from Vietnam, from the last 20 years of conflict to what they're seeing in the Ukraine. These are all great statistics. The problem, and we've got to balance this, is that the next generation weapons, the weapons that are being held back at this point, have not been introduced. So to try to have a predictive algorithm specifically based on the path, we're going to learn the lessons again
Yep.
that we learned in the past, and we're going to pay for those lessons with the blood of our children by this point, because most of us are retired. And one of the biggest things we've got to do is, in medicine, we have plenty of conferences. It's almost we're getting around to the point that I call conference season. Starting, then towards the end of February, it's conference almost every month until September timeframe. But one of the things a lot of military medicine, whether it be enlisted or officer, they don't do is they don't go to the combat arms conferences to see what they're talking about. They don't go to the new innovative weaponry conferences to see what medical effects of some of these weapons will have. And there's simulators out there that do predictive algorithms, and they will run multiple scenarios and tell you the expectations of if this type of employment was utilized or this type of employment was utilized. And just like in that old 1980s movie, War Games, it'll run so many simulations and give you the data. Some of those things we really need to look at. But back to your point about the Walker dip, we have, in the Army, the whiskey has individual critical task lists, and it's pretty extensive. However, the thing that we refresh these individuals on is trauma. At Mystic Centers, it's trauma. But when you think about this, we send them with an MES, and it's got a bunch of pharmaceuticals in it, and they don't have the patient contacts. But we expect them, and we brief the capability on paper that they can do the full list of the critical task list. The only time they get to see patients is when they're deployed.
Before we this is opening cans of worms in my brain right now, so I'm gonna ask a question on this one. And since we are pretty inter-service, so Navy Corpsmen, Air Force Med Techs, they all have the same basic mission task list. For those who are unfamiliar with military medicine, like a standard 68 whiskey, which is a medic in the Army, which translates to most everybody else in the military. It's what, 4 months of school in AIT now. So like, we take these kids off the street, we get them EMT basic. We get them some surface level understandings. And to be honest, when I look back to when I was a baby medic, like we got just enough information to be really dangerous. Like I told a joke at my retirement that like I convinced someone having a panic attack that they were actually in anaphylaxis, so I could give them an EpiPen because it was the only thing I knew how to do. So yeah, don't recommend epinephrine for panic attacks, but hey, whatever. So yeah, like I actually just recently put a post out there about moral injury in medics because we take our most junior across the board, whether it's Fleet Marine Corpsmen, Army medics, IDMTs, not IDMTs, sorry, those are a little higher trained, but like your basic medics, we put them in the most autonomous places, like the infantry platoon. You're a medic, new guy. Here's a 40-man platoon. Go out into the woods and figure it out. Like with Twig, we did a prolonged field care or a delayed evacuation care research project out here at Fort Lewis, and it wasn't great. So, like, my question for you is how, because with that 4 months, with the stuff we have for simulations, we're talking war games, we're talking models, we're talking effects of weapons we haven't seen. How do we take with the limited bandwidth and time to get medics to take away, like, the TC3 algorithm works, but we're, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, like, I see a failure of critical thinking in our young medics. Curious to hear, with the given technology we have right now, what some of those solutions to potentially like closing the gap of getting people to think versus react.
So I'm a big believer in training to failure. And I'm also a big believer in you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. So I have very early in my career, um, you know, in 2001, when we deployed in Afghanistan, I hit the limit of advance of my medical knowledge. You know, as well as I do, when you're in special operations and you've done all this training and you keep passing all these things and you're doing great, you feel invincible.
Yep.
And you feel that there's nothing you can't learn, there's nothing that you can't do until you hit that limit where you weren't taught something or there's something going on, you know what it is, but you can't remember, if there's an alternate way of doing it because you're out of supplies or you're out of a specific medication. And how can you make this work? And it totally was unplanned because as the flow of battle happens, you run out of things and you do, the best you can initially, not expecting others to get injured. And if something doesn't go right, you don't get picked up, an aircraft gets shot down. You find yourself in a worse situation, and you don't have the same ability to follow those algorithms. And one of the most dangerous things about Teachable C that I've seen is people don't remember that those are guidelines. They're not the law. They're not, policy. People need to be proficient at them. But at the same time, you have to understand that the tactical situation is going to dictate things and may put you in a position where you don't have enough supplies. You have to get creative. But first and foremost, especially now with the internet, you can learn so much. I mean, I remember when I did hospital rotations, Rod Miller from 375, he and I went to a rotation at Ben Taub in Houston, Texas, and I was an E4 promotable at the time. I spent my entire paycheck on buying 3 books that were recommended to me by physicians there. And I studied, but back then, that's what you had is books. They had the internet, but it was, very, very difficult. And they didn't have the vast amount of knowledge and resources there are now. But I made sure that I took time on my own to learn and find a way and ask people. And luckily, like I said, those mentors were there and gave of their time to ensure that questions were answered. Some of them gave me homework. Dr. John Craig was one of those. He would I would ask one question. It'd be a 2-hour lecture, and then he'd give me homework that he actually wanted back within a couple of days. But I think that that's what, until we find a systematic way, it's going to have to come from each individual.
Yeah, you're hitting some. I chuckle because after the whole EpiPen incident, realizing like I don't know a thing about medicine. Like I bought the CDMT, the Merck manual. Like I had a whole kit bag full of books. Fortunately, I was with Strikers, so I could bring my library with me. Because like it's amazing how we empower these kids to think. The story that I like to tell is it always comes up in SOFMIS on the Special Operations Medic Refresher course. Like, still you have SOCM students, the kids going through the basic SOF medics course, like questioning tenured physicians at the hospital rotations because they're putting lidocaine in with epi in places they're not supposed to. And like, I'm sorry, I've been a board certified plastic surgeon for 25 years. I think I know what I'm doing, paramedic student. That's something like working at the Mystic. The kids that have come through are so hungry to learn. But what I'm seeing, and I don't know if you're seeing this, I'm seeing a failure of leadership, like not in a manner like, hey, you're doing it wrong. It's just like there's not extrinsic motivation coming from leadership to intrinsically motivate these kids to be thirsty for knowledge, to peel back the layers on the CPGs, The TC3 spot on, you hit it, it's guidelines, but people are following it like gospel. Like we're failing people in tables because they're not following guidelines. And like instead of saying, hey, yeah. So I guess my thing is like through your career, and since we've both mentored junior medics, what do you find is the best way to provide that extrinsic nudge to light the intrinsic fire on these kids to like be thirsty for knowledge?
One thing that has always kind of worked for me is have them go through a lane or talk through a patient scenario and have them do it kind of like we did in refresher. And when you hit that stump that you don't know, it's kind of like missing a question on a test. You know, you'll go back and you'll look it up, and that question you'll never forget it because you went and looked it up afterwards because you couldn't believe you got it wrong. And what you do is you know, in my opinion, you show them someone where they want to be. You know, if they want to be at a higher level, more independent, have those people there so that way they can get those people to encourage them. I generally I've always been one of those people. I don't berate people. I don't tell them they're wrong or, you know, try to put them down. What I try to do is say, you know, this is what you could have done better.
Yep.
This is what I would study this, or I would look at this and give them some resources or point them in certain ways, you know, for resources. And then I always encourage them. It's almost like people are afraid to publish or people are afraid to put together a case study. So case studies, it's so funny. I always mention this since I've gone, you know, since my first Soma back in like, guys will always tell you some awesome stories at the bar. Ask them to present it, they don't want to do it. And a lot of it is because we all, you know, essentially as cocky as we can be and, you know, at the bar, we're very humble people. And we know that people have done way more than we've done and sacrificed a lot more. But at the end of the day is every one of us has knowledge to impart and they've got different situations that have happened. And, you know, to your point earlier, I have, you know, in this role as the honorary sergeant major, I've gotten to talk and speak with a lot of medics. And I tell them all the time, the only difference between, you know, you all who are hungry for this knowledge and special operations medics is that we got more opportunities. There's a larger amount of general purpose forces, and there's in the ratio to education and schooling is not fair. But at the same time, and that's why I think we see so many that really care about medicine going into nursing programs, PA programs, even med school. I think there's a lot of people, you know, that would have, if we would have had like a warrant officer rank, would have stayed to go ahead and train others, and you still would have had, you know, capacity. But because I enjoyed being on the ground and being on a team. After a while, wear and tear happens. You're not going to be as fast as you used to be. You're not going to be as agile. But that's when, you know, you're there for your mind, not for your physical prowess. But I really believe that there's a lot of medics out there that, given those opportunities, they will excel immensely. One of the things I was going to mention with the initial entry population, it's a little difficult because we've gathered knowledge through our whole careers and we were always hungry and starving. It was almost like it was given to us and fed to us just enough to keep us starving for the next one. And at the height of the war, when you and I served, you came back, you know, went to a med course, maybe a refresher course, maybe a hospital rotation, and maybe a you know, a specialized, you know, medical, you know, school, maybe a tactical school, and then you were right out the door again for another deployment. But without that happening now, there's not really an emphasis. But these young, you know, people that are going through AIT, and I'd say they're between 18 to say 27-year-olds. For many of them, they haven't decided if the military is going to be a alone medicine. And if we try to throw everything at them, well, there's a reason that a lot of them didn't go to college. Some of them because they couldn't afford it. Some of them because it wasn't the right training modality for them. But at the end of the day, if they could have or would have done it, that's what they'd be doing. So we have to ensure that we don't overwhelm them with what we're doing.
That's a really good point. That there's so many rabbit holes to go down on all these things. But thinking about that, so my background, for those who are not familiar, I spent most of my career in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, where we fortunately were able to fix our manning so we can retain medical talent for a little bit longer. Because that's one thing we see, especially in general purpose forces, like unless you go SOF or somewhere else, like you're done essentially being a medic at E6 or so, staff sergeant rank. So, and then two, I always had a running joke about my 160th medics is like, hey, I need chronic, like not chronic, like voluntary underachievers because I need people who can think like physicians. I need people who can think like field grade medical planners. I need people who can do nursing skills, who can do resuscitation. Oh, and by the way, I need you to stay enlisted and keep rowing the boat for me because we're the next level of care for all these like elements of SOCOM. Because like that's the thing is looking at population, you've seen it, it's like I'll throw a Ricky Ditzel plug for his Special Operations Forces, the School of Medicine program. You guys look it out, softtosom.org. Great program for medics looking to go to the next level. But also, we need medics to stay at this level. And I think that's one of the biggest things for medical leadership that's hard to grasp is like for people like you and I, like it's like we have to be willing to hold ourselves back from going to like getting more letters for lack of a better term. Like you, the number of people we've been in circles with who are phenomenal medics who could easily go crush med school, not saying I could. Like it's getting that understanding. And then now too, with the war peeling back, the soldier center medical homes taking away patient contacts from medics. You're seeing medics just doing motor pool, gate guard, they're not being stimulated. You brought it up earlier about not going to like the maneuver conferences. It's like we're at a point now where our medical leadership needs to emphasize to the maneuver leaders that are ultimately responsible for these line medics to like, hey, our guys are not getting the training, and this is what's gonna happen if we go out the door. Because in your opinion, do you feel like we're doing at the, and again, opinions are our own, no one else's. At the command level, are we doing enough to emphasize that the special staff population needs to have specific training objectives met, or there's going to be significant risk to force when it comes to maneuver engagement?
So it's very interesting. I think that there's three verticals we need to look at. One, you've got DHA. We can assume most risk there because they are in a fixed facility. If they are in a force comm unit that is, if we've got medical personnel within a combat arms unit, and or direct support to combat arms, that is where we can assume the least amount of risk. And almost like a tiered approach, we need to send our best and brightest to the front, so that way we increase the ability to increase survivability. One of the biggest issues that I have seen, and you brought this up earlier, is we're sending the youngest ones out there, which is fine. We look at it from a point of view of, and I hate to say this, expendability, but yet youth and resiliency, right? The younger you are, the quicker you heal, there's all kinds of things. But all of this is based in what I consider an inverted pyramid. And at the base of that pyramid is your medic, because in a platoon of 38 people, you have one. If that person goes down and is injured, even if they're awake, I'm not going to be able to teach somebody pharmacology and bark orders on what to be able to do, let alone be able to find things in my aid bag that I've packed and describe what those things are. We are going to learn some lessons if we don't start shifting and adapting. And if you look over the past, 20 years of conflict, there was two major things that came out of this war. Number one, tactical combat casualty care. That being said, with Dr. Coltwalt's paper, it was proven to eliminate preventable death on the battlefield. One unit has been able to do that because of their training regiment. I don't know if any other unit has been able to claim the same thing, but we know it works. It proved that those concepts work. Second thing is, we know that if you make it to surgery, you've got, a 96% chance of survival. This next war, we're not going to have that luxury of making it to surgery so fast. The one thing that we can do is increase the knowledge and expand the capability of the medic or corpsman. And one of the things, and I'll tell you this, I've had the privilege of having one deployment with the first, what was it, MSOC A, and those are some of the best corpsmen that I've ever worked with. They did everything from sick call all the way through, their special operations requirements. They focused on medicine. And when you look at the way that they directly supported the Marine Corps, I think that is a very good model because they balanced all the tactical and maintained all the medical. The Rangers did an excellent job, and Harold Montgomery and Dr. Coltwalt and guys like Chris Pappas and John Detro and several others, Brett Ackerman, they were able to get Alta and CHCS remotely into their clinics so that the Ranger medic could still do sick call. And to your point earlier, once we automated, that's what kind of took away the ability for a medic to see a patient, because now it was causing providers double the work. Yep. Because they could go ahead and do an SF600, but it was still going to have to be entered into the computer. And I think that we would go and take a huge leap to getting back to that proficiency if there was an enlisted medical provider role created in MHS Genesis that they could work under. Now, of course, it would have to be, I would say, do it to encompass all enlisted medics. Then you only get privileged as to if you're an IDC, a sub IDC, SO IDC, or a 68 whiskey or whatnot, flight medic. And that way your formulary is there, everything is there, and then you get evaluated off of it. You have to re-credential. There's got to be a balance. And maybe and one of the biggest things someone mentioned to me is like, and this was here at Fort Sam, they said that maybe we should look at doing month rotations. And I said, I think that's a horrible idea. And they looked at me and they said, well, isn't that what you guys do in special operations? I said, it is, but it's a horrible idea because you can go to a hospital and just be slammed in 3 days and then see nothing the rest of the time. Or you can go to a hospital and be slammed every day you're there or not be slammed at all. I think those things need to be tied to actual patient contacts to actually see people's faces, get your true general impression, not just of trauma, but of the acute care. Because we see more DMBI in deployments than we do trauma.
Yeah, like what 1/5 of all deaths, not even casualties, just deaths, were DNBI related. And that's a huge thing. So I look back to when I learned the most as a medic was working sick call at the squadron aid station that I was assigned to. I know that like my old battalion aid station, the MHS, the Genesis super user has created a profile that the medics can go in. I've talked to Mike Remley, a couple other people up at AMED about like, hey, this is a gap if we close it, because right now medics at Soldier Center medical homes aren't doing anything. They're front desk staff, they're MSAs. To be fair, like I get it. Why we went to that standard, because we're trying to get equal standard of care. But when we take away the medic's ability to see their formation, they don't get to do patient contacts, because seeing somebody sick versus not sick is pretty huge. Getting that clinical impression, because our line medics, what are we asking them to do? Make clinical impressions on evac. Like, that's it. Like, yeah, they're going to do initial treatments, but we need them to know when to say, do I stay or play, or do I load and go? And then two, like you're spot on, is when we create inefficiencies in a system that makes more work for overworked people, it's not going to get used. Like, you can write notes all day long, but my thing is we have an EHR, we have a program of record that's not going anywhere. Why don't we fix it so the medics can get contacts? And like we could diatribe that all day.
And what's funny is because we taught everything to RVUs and we went to more of a civilian model, creating an enlisted provider role just within their scope or within their ICTLs, because at least the Army does not have a written scope of practice yet off the ICTLs. That would ensure that they're able to take care of people when they're out of contact. And we've talked about telemedicine for years, but as well as I do, there's only so much bandwidth and there's only so many radios. And in order to be able to take up that much dedicated bandwidth for that long of a time, especially with the targeting systems and missile systems that are out there now, it is a very dangerous thing to look at. But it was kind of funny. You said something earlier, and it jogged my memory about a quote that when they were and I want to say it was Bill Donovan that said it when they were building the OSS. They asked him what kind of recruits they wanted, and he said, "I need PhDs that can win a bar fight."
Yep, absolutely.
And and I think it's still true today. And when we look at, and here's the funny part, as I've looked at the conflicts and we work, everybody talks about contested logistics as being a challenge. I don't know how this would work, but the cartels have been doing this and bringing tons of illicit drugs into the U.S. where we've got the best radar, best sonar, blah blah. If you want to learn how to operate in contested logistics, you might want to go, pull a couple of them out of prison and question them.
You're not wrong. I always joke, like, because you think about Afghanistan, man, 20 years there, and what we're throwing the kitchen sink off these guys who've been fighting the same way since Genghis Khan came over the hills, and like, yeah, simplicity, like. You see it time and time again, and actually, it brought me to a thought because so you brought up the 75th Raging Regiment, which is the only formation that has truly gotten to that like 0% preventable cause of death. Like they've had some phenomenal saves over the history, but from my opinion, is it's because back when McChrystal was, I think he was 275's commander, it's when he started the Big Five, and casualty response was a Big Five command emphasized battle drill, which to me highlights the fact that no, TC3 is an operational concept that requires command buy-in, and the medic just fits in a small realm of that. Like if I don't have my all service members, I don't have my CLSers battle trained to react, like they're gonna be dead by the time I get to them anyway. So like I think that's my biggest takeaway with this fifth model, which is exportable. You just need to have command emphasis buy-in that says, hey, casualty response is going to be one of our big ones, that it can be exported. But like I think that's where looking at maneuver conferences, heck, I sat on a fires combined arms rehearsal one time right after the medevac combined arms rehearsal. And you know what was funny? The AXPs on the terrain model got replaced with TRPs immediately afterwards. I'm like, oh, you guys are putting your ambulances on top of artillery points? Okay, cool. So TRP1 fire for effect. Oh, there goes your AXP. Bye.
It's funny. I think we've kind of both talked around it, but AMED, and I shouldn't say AMED, but all the medical commands, they operate in their own silos. And so we interject from another vertical into combat arms and say, hey, this is a requirement, do this. However, if we integrated with them, it wouldn't be an external entity, forcing upon it's funny, and this is a great thing because, you and I both flown, but, you were in the 160 for a long time, and I love the 160s for this, the checklists. When a pilot's going through the checklist, what's one of the checklist things? Commo.
Yep.
What's one of the things, when you're doing your pre-combat checks, hey, radio frequency's working. Hey, let's test each other's stuff out, make sure we've got the right, comsec. It's very rare that in a battle drill like that medical is even considered or tested on a checklist. It's just assumed that it's going to be there. And that is why those other people have integrated and medical has not. But here's the thing. So that, and on that line of integration, during COVID, the military was authorized to give support, medical support to, several hospitals, clinics, and whatnot. And unfortunately, due to the vast majority, to include the Navy, not having a equivalent civilian certification, they were reduced down to a job that was at an EMT level. So in the future, we've seen an uptake over the years of everything from what just happened in Louisiana over the holidays with a vehicle being utilized as a weapon, to several different disasters, whether they be natural, natural disasters that have happened. But we need to create capacity. The Boston bombing. You look at those pictures and you can see everyone's there to help each other out. They don't care who you are, what's going on. Let's get you out of the area. Let's try to get you help. And I always tell people, I look at some moms and I look at people who don't study medicine, and I don't judge them. If it's not for everybody, but the scariest thing, and I'm sure you've seen this, is when a mom is looking at her son or daughter injured or bleeding, and they don't know what to do, and they're relying on someone else to save their son or daughter. And the military, and this is a program that and I don't remember former President Nixon's wife's name. She came up with it, and then it was picked up again by Nancy Reagan, and it disappeared again, and then it was picked up again by Michelle Obama, where they wanted to emphasize enlisted getting certified or civilian certifications, and they did it because they wanted people to come out to have jobs and whatnot. But I think that we're in a time that is beyond having a job. It is so that way we can have a baseline of interoperability and integration for those times in crisis.
It's funny you bring this up because some of my other initiatives that I work on, so I do a lot of public safety consulting for primarily my main client out here right now is private Catholic schools, ironically. And one of the big emphasis I focus on is like, hey, like self-reliance. You see that with Stop the Bleed as well. But like, so ironically, like I like this is a rabbit hole that I'll try to keep it narrow. It's like I do a lot of active shooter training with law enforcement and rescue task force guys. I'm like, hey, it's really easy to teach a room full of kids how to do bleeding control. As you walk in there, say, hey, if your buddy has red coming out, push on it real hard. Like at the natural reaction, yeah, we are ingrained biologically how to stop it, but then somehow we convince ourselves that we don't know how to do it. Yeah, self-reliance, it's massive. Like in the disaster response space, and so my degree is in disaster management. It's like, yeah, the response phase when you have specialists coming in is like, I'll throw an arbitrary number of 5% of the entire event. Everything else, the mitigation, preparedness, most of the response, and then the recovery is all on the individual or the organization. When we look at the military expanding that, I think actually VA has created that med tech position that medics can slide into, which is a little bit more higher credentialed, which you're in the same group chats I am, where I'm like railing, like, hey, we don't have really a federal health reserve system. We don't have that ability. Like, we've established crisis standards of care, but we haven't established crisis standards of credentialing.
You know, what's funny is I had a conversation probably about 10 years ago about that exact same thing. Um, the key for, or I shouldn't say, well, the key for the credentialing that we have gotten, or in the depth and breadth of the scope of practice that we were allowed to practice in while we're in the military, it has not gotten adopted or recognized in the civilian sector because we have not partnered with academia to where they can create an equivalency through academics. And until you go ahead and transfer it to where civilian people can gain that same knowledge and get some type of a licensure or certification, it will never be taken, it'll never take off in the civilian sector. It's just a small group of elitist people that can do that. And so it has to be through a partnership, and there has to be consensus. Several people could write we could get together with several different people to write a consensus statement from several different states. But I've been in some meetings with, EMS, going to EMS World, EMS Today, and sitting in some of those meetings, you are encumbered by state laws. You are encumbered by, what some people want to do versus what's the actual need. And then on top of that, I just found out there was a huge push of people that wanted to be able to go through a paramedic course and be independent providers, which I am totally against. You do not learn enough in there. However, in my opinion, there's a large jump between paramedic and PA. We, across the United States, we have it, and even in the military, we have an access to care issue. Can you imagine if we were to take soft medics and then with the initiative from the Department of the Army to get a select population paramedic qualified along with their normal ICTLs, and them having the ability to see patients within their scope of practice, or take all the IDCs and have a kind of like we did in SOCOM with an advanced tactical practitioner licensure, we would create an immense amount of capacity. And the Navy, I think, has done a great job in having different levels of medics, because they tier them to what the need is. Your sub guys, They're used to working with very minimal stuff. Everything has its place, very organized. Thank God I've never been on a sub. I think I was extremely bored. I've only been on 3 ships, and I'm glad I joined the Army. But they do an excellent job. And then they get out after seeing multiple patients and practicing for multiple years, and they don't even have an EMT license. You look at IDMTs and you see the same thing. So we have, and the VA has recognized that we have some great skill sets and great people out there. But there really needs to be a gathering and a consensus statement written at the federal level. You look at Stop the Bleed, and it took the Hartford consensus to come together to make a statement that nationally we needed to have a Stop the Bleed campaign.
This is like CPR, and it's not hard. I thought long and hard about this, about the 4 medical emergencies that require me to do immediate action or someone's going to die. Massive hemorrhage, true cardiac arrest, true airway obstruction, then anaphylaxis, real anaphylaxis, not panic attack anaphylaxis. Yeah, and then what is the one thing that only a medic can do? It's give epinephrine outside of a prescription, but if they have an EpiPen, anybody can do it. Some of the points you're bringing on, like just out since I've done kind of a lot of digging into this and having worked at the state level in the National Guard out here, especially during COVID, like helping some of the listeners understand the nuances of your federal government and the Federalist Society that we live in. Yes. Okay. History lesson now. Back in the Jeffersonian days. Not just kidding. So I look at, since I do public safety and we have some large events coming up, I was looking at how Paris did the Olympics, and man, I'm jealous of France, because when I look at just the public security sector, like the National Police and the Gendarmerie, that's it for law enforcement. Oh, the fire service is completely nationalized as well. So like, hey, I need to redeploy 40,000 cops. I can do that from across the country. Good luck doing that in the US. So that being said, like on the Department of Health side, I've been a staunch advocate for, like, especially looking at military medicine, DHAs, like instead of having someone at MedCom is going to like, instead of having individual medical silos inside the services, is expand the public health service drastically. And again, this will never work, because if it sounds good on paper, it won't work. But like your entire public health service becomes your national public health service, that when national defense needs someone, they can pull from them. They're specially trained individuals in that. Kind of very similar to like kind of the JSOC model of where you have like, it's a very small nexus, but like same idea, inter-service people coming all together and they get the proper training to support the mission. Yeah. Where we also so the federal government, contrary to a popular belief, is not actually that powerful. What Health and Human Services can do through Medicare and all this other stuff, CMS, is like, hey, we're not going to give you this money if you don't do this. So like that's where like consensus statement, without all 54, to include the territories, departments of health getting on board with a nationally recognized licensure, because that's the ultimate holdup. Is like state of Washington, for instance, super annoying to try to get a paramedic license because it's so county based. Go to Georgia, you see like we can just take it and get it. And that's where I don't know, like there's no answer to this because it's just the system doesn't support it. But like that, what we're talking about requires like, okay, Health and Human Services, Stafford Act activation at the federal level. Now we can give authorities to these providers. So thinking about the layers to get this to fruition, like DOD, DHS, FEMA, HHS, and then all the departments of health, which here, I'll throw this challenge out to our political savvy friends out there. Go ahead and call your congressmen or representatives to see if you can activate this. But like, I completely agree that national defense strategy, like Department of Defense, we do a very good job focusing outwards, but like, just because we haven't had a domestic crisis that requires an internal DoD activation doesn't mean we won't have it. So why not set the conditions through what we just talked about?
It's funny things, 2 funny things. Number one, recently I was able to have the privilege of going and looking at the Texas Department of Public Safety do their special operations medical assessment for specific special operations units within the Texas Department of Public Safety. And Governor Abbott supports those people immensely. They have a very, very good system that would rival some of the tier 1 assessments they have out there. And I was extremely impressed. One of the things that I realized in talking with them, they are on their way to build a course in the aggregate. They've got 4 people that have completed, and they've actually attended the refreshers at Fort Liberty. Let's say Fort Bragg at the Special Warfare Medical Training Center. And there has been discussions to hopefully have some of the people from Fort Liberty to come out and validate their course. It's not done all in one stretch because of the fact that it is not they're not capable of losing people for that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be broken up, but the information is still there. The assessments are still there. The criteria is still there and the quality is still there. So it'll probably take them 3 years to 4 years to produce the same person that it takes about a year at Fort Bragg to produce. However, this is the first time I've seen a state lean this far forward into trying to integrate. Luckily, Texas has some very lenient laws for the Texas Medical Board that allows delegation. That is a Band-Aid fix, but at the same time, it's a step in the right direction. But to your point about congressmen and senators, and how do we look at doing this for the homeland?
Yep.
And how do we reduce the amount of people that we lose in the next conflict? I can tell you that in the next conflict, from what they're predicting, there are massive losses. And the one thing that no congressman, no senator, whether it be at the state level or congressional level, wants is a lobby filled with bereaved parents and bereaved spouses, asking them why the last person that took care of their loved one had the same certification as the person driving the ambulance versus the person in the back taking care of the patient. And right now, for the majority of the DoD, that's what we have for an EMT license or no license at all.
Yeah.
Credentialed by training within the DoD.
Yeah. And that's powerful. And with a statement like that, I think that's what we're going to do. Let that one sit and marinate and hover. So go back and listen to that statement that John just made and let it resonate. And if that doesn't stir up emotions for a call to action of some sort, I don't know what will. But for John, hey man, great seeing you. Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Would love to have you back on because I know we can talk for hours. So again, man, thanks again. Really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.